Hello and welcome to Occult Book Review. This week's book is Shamans of Mongolia by Kevin Turner. This is one of the most enjoyable and educational books I've read about shamanism recently. One of the reasons for that is it's almost like it's two books in one. It's a history of Mongolian shamanism. It looks at the anthropology, the sociological implications, which is something I'll get into later on in the review. But it's also a travelogue. And what's really helpful is the fact that Kevin Turner is such a great writer. He's a very descriptive writer, and I would imagine that a lot of that comes from his own shamanic journeying and his ability to pick out what's important within a scene, within a map of his own consciousness, and then to translate that and describe it and bring it back to us. So, Shamans of Mongolia, let's take a closer look. So the author himself talks about his own childhood and his roots in shamanism. He had some unusual experiences himself, and later on in life he was associated with the Monroe Institute, and he talks about people like Ingo Swann and Michael Harner. Indeed, he talks about Mongolian shamanism within the context of Harner's own definition, which would, I suppose, boil down to two questions. Does a shaman perform miracles, and does a shaman travel to spiritual worlds? Now, later on in the book, Turner shows his own continuing education, I suppose, when he gets into the realm of the holographic universe and quantum physics. And indeed, the holographic universe, the writing style is actually quite similar in that both authors, like Talbot, Turner is able to bring you into the book and immerse you within the world that he's in. And a lot of that, some of it is humorous as well, because he finds himself in some uncomfortable situations, and it's all because of his own sense of adventure, which I suppose comes from shamanic journeying itself. As you might expect, we get a great breakdown of what shamanism is and where it comes from Turner initially. He talks about the Tungus definition, where the word shaman comes from. He talks about Mircea Eliade's ideas that even yoga comes from initial attempts by shaman to merge with various energetic forms. Shamanism is a worldwide phenomenon, and it shouldn't be confined to any one culture. So I suppose even the word shaman itself can be problematic these days, especially when people are talking about appropriation and so on. But as Turner talks about and demonstrates, the actual practice of shamanism is worldwide. Initially, Turner is surprised to discover that there seems to be no uniformity to the cosmology of Mongolian shamanism. And later on in the book, he realizes that that's not strictly true. It's just that you have to go through the various tribal and regional interpretations and spirit worlds in order to find that deeper level. So he goes about on this journey in the book, and we get a breakdown of the various strains of shamanism in Mongolia and why there are so many strains. So that brings us then to the kind of persecution of Mongolia in general, which Turner breaks down as well. We hear about not just the communist persecution, which most people would be aware of, but also the Buddhist persecution and the way the Buddhism took over shamanism and ritualized it to such a degree in Mongolia that a lot of ethnic variations were almost lost. But thankfully, and I suppose it's to do with the landscape and how wild and inhospitable it is, and how people can survive out of contact for so long, that kind of helped shamanism survive it in some ways. Turner uses his own traveling, his physical land traveling in the book to guide us through the Mongolian shamanistic history, and I thought it was a really, really instructive way of writing. So with that, we get all kinds of descriptions of the shamanistic rituals and the equipment and the sacredness of the instruments, why certain trees, maybe a tree hit by lightning might be used as a drumstick, for example, why shaman wear mirrors on their body, the consummation of mutton and alcohol and vodka in particular. And it's really, really bizarre how a shaman can drink so much vodka in an altered state of consciousness in order to appease the spirits, obviously, and then emerge from the trance and be completely sober. It's as Turner writes about it, it's very it's scary almost, and it really brings a level of seriousness as well as profundity to the whole ceremonial aspect. One of the important aspects of shamanism in the Mongolian context is the fact that the chief was also the shaman, and this relates to an important aspect of the book, which is the growth of nationalism and the deification, I suppose, of Genghis Khan in present-day Mongolia. But as Turner shows, this is really a response to the oppression that Mongolians went through for thousands of years. When Buddhism initially came in, it was more kind of a Lamism, I suppose, a different variant than the Buddhism we know today, which is much more ceremonial and ritualistic. But initially Buddhism had, it took a lot from shamanism itself. Even, and I didn't know this until I read the book, the idea of the kind of the leader being reincarnated was initially a shamanistic attribute, and not just in Mongolia. Turner gives examples of Canadian indigenous tribes also having this particular attribute. So we see the parallel then coming from the kind of Buddhists later on, even taking the Dalai Lama and taking that exactly from the shamanism they encountered in this takeover is shown particularly in the changing of the black shamanism and white shamanism to the black and yellow shamanism. What we also see here is the need to convert or be persecuted, and Turner talks about the work of Peter Kingsley. I would recommend In the Dark Places of Wisdom as well to go along with this particular book. So Mongolian shamanism, it's described later on as not a religion but a practice. It's described as having the three worlds, upper, middle and lower, but Turner talks about how the lower world didn't initially have the negative connotation that it does today. And indeed he talks about how various shaman were afraid to admit that they went to the lower world because of the negative connotations which came with the Buddhist influence. But many shaman talk about visiting the lower world and seeing relatives living quite happily, according to Turner in this book. To me, the part of the book that was most interesting, and I suppose the part that got most attention, was the descriptions of the Tenger or the Tengerism type of shamanism. Tenger is broken down by Turner to show its relationship to the word Dinger, which is a Sumerian word, both words alluding to sky deities or heaven, which is very interesting because as Turner talks to shaman in the book, they find it difficult to differentiate between the deity itself and the place. And if anyone has read Gordon White's Star.Ships, they'll see a parallel there, especially when we're talking about how the stories going back thousands and thousands of years of various gods and goddesses also have this blurring between the kind of god and the realm. And I suppose you could tie that into some of the work of Crowley as well. It's also interesting to return to the holographic universe or the quantum physics aspect then. So a Tenger could be related to the idea of a particle and a wave. Depending on how you interact with this, deity or place or energy, that's the kind of interaction and response you will get. Turner ends up with the best description of a Tenger being varying frequencies of transcendent consciousness. So that allows him to open up the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world into different layers, and allows them to blend in with each other. And it's the best way to describe how a shaman would interact, not just journeying, but drawing the energy into the shaman. And this is something that comes up with Mongolian shamanism. It was supposed that it was different to other forms of shamanism because people presumed Mongolian shamanism were drawing spirits down instead of journeying outwards. But as Turner finds out, this is just something that the shaman were reluctant to divulge. Turner also shows the parallels between Zoroastrianism and the Mongolian shamanism by showing how followers of Zoroaster fleeing Muslim persecution moved into Asia and brought with them the star lore as well, the Ursa Major and the Pleiades being particularly auspicious constellations. So at the end of the book, Turner also turns to some sociological questions. He asks whether the rise of Mongolian shamanism is just to do with nationalism, or might there be other sociological factors such as poverty, because people can afford to go to a shaman more than they can afford to go to a Western type doctor, for example. I recommend Shamans of Mongolia. I think it's a book that will give you a great insight into Mongolian shamanism, obviously, but also a great insight into Mongolian culture and the landscape, and the characters as well are very colourful and bring a perspective to shamanism that we don't have enough of, in my opinion. So I'll see you again next week for another occult book review. Thanks.